Hey, Pat and Doug here with another episode of the Wealthy Gym Owners. And today we're going to talk about how and when to pay yourself as an owner. I mean, I think it's very common to hear the phrase pay yourself first. And I think there's probably plenty of validity to this because a lot of times owners pay themselves last or maybe not at all occasionally. So let's kind of unpack this and really dig into what paying yourself should look like if you aspire to be a wealthy gym owner. So, Doug, get us going.
Yeah, I mean, I picked this topic because I had some empathy with a client, a coaching call the other day where an owner was not paying himself. And I was like, when is the appropriate time to start paying yourself? Because I would say I want to have some understanding that obviously the bigger your gym gets, the easier, hopefully, if we're doing things right, the easier it gets to pay yourself, the more you can pay yourself. But if we kind of start in the beginning, when you're maybe making 5, 10, 15 grand a month top line for a brick and mortar gym, most, if not all of that is going to be going to your expenses if we factor in lease and all that stuff. So I think it's trying to sprint, head down and sprint, focus on the right strategies, get some coaching and support to get you, in my opinion, at least probably into that 15K ish a month, depending upon where you're based out of and what market you're in. Because if you kind of use my 40-30-30 model where you're taking 30% for yourself, at least at that point, you can have, call it a couple grand a month that you should be able to stash away for yourself. But before that, I certainly realized there's the pain that goes through of a startup where you're not profitable, breaking even, et cetera. So as a target for those of you listening that aren't there yet, I think getting to a point where and we can talk past that, how to pay, but I realized that there's probably a understanding of what your break even is. Like, what do you need to know? How much do you need to make just to pay your bills for your brick and mortar gym? And then we can figure out on top of that how much to pay yourself.
Very good. So, I mean, in reality, early stage business owners, I mean, we're just trying to create that upward trajectory, get clients in the door, start to generate revenue. I mean, is there I guess the question I have is like, is this something where it's like, okay, we're doing this when it's kind of painful, or are we waiting till it's comfortable? And I think I know the answer here, but I want you to unpack that.
Yeah. So some of this is, and a lot of this is what I would maybe call like the messy middle, where you're maybe debating, do I hire somebody, say to put numbers to it for brick and mortar gyms, you're in that like 10 to 25 or 30 range, right? Where you don't quite have a team yet. You may want to build a team, et cetera. And so the question becomes, do I take some for myself? Do I invest into the team? Do I, as we hear often, kind of reinvest back into the business? And a lot of this, fortunately slash unfortunately, is based upon your personal situation. We have clients where the spouse has a very stable job and can float the family for a year or two while the gym continues to grow. We have other clients where they need to be able to make 3 grand, 5 grand a month just to be able to pay their personal bills. So I'm certainly a big fan of the pay yourself first model. And I'm certainly also a fan of making sure that we are giving money to ourselves before we give it to our team. I want to take care of my team. I want to have a great team long term. But at the end of the day, you're the one taking the risk. You're the one putting in all the work in the beginning. And even long term, taking the brunt of most things, being a relatively, in the grand scheme of business, small business, service based, you're carrying the lion's share, which certainly means it's fair and it's equitable that you pay yourself first. And you should be the highest paid employee on your team always. So I would never recommend a gym owner kind of pay a team member before they're paying themselves. I think that's we can kind of outwork that before dealing with those struggles. So definitely a fan there of the pay yourself first and pay yourself, even if it means delaying things like hiring or reinvesting back into the business.
Yeah, I think that it's just incredibly common for people to do the opposite, right? There's always this delay of gratification, and we're kind of told that's good, but man, I mean, you are the one who's invested the time, effort, energy, risk into this, and there has to be some reward. And frankly, what each of us ask of ourselves as an owner, that puts a lot of extra stress on a household, on a family, right? I mean, the time, the irregular schedule, the burden of the responsibilities. And if you compound that with also just adding money stress that doesn't necessarily have to be there, you all of a sudden are just magnifying challenges that probably already exist. And we started businesses at different stages. You were really young when you started yours. That was my second career after working at university. And everybody's going to be different in kind of where they're starting along this journey. Hey, are we bootstrapping this? Are we taking a loan? Whatever else. But I mean, there's some things that are universal. Doesn't really matter, right? Like it's going to be hard. There's going to be extra burden on you, and you're still going to have to pay to live. So if that last variable is one that we have a little bit of control over, then we definitely need to take care of ourselves and not add stress where it's not really necessary. So if that's kind of the trajectory of when, what does paying yourself look like as an owner?
Yeah. So most and mortar gym owners eventually should be set up, in my opinion, as an LLC taxed as an S corp, which means that you should really have two ways that you pay yourself, right? You are, and again, certainly as always, run this by your accountant, but you are an employee of your business because for most of you listening, really for the lifetime of most brick and mortar gyms, you are the kind of general manager slash head trainer or whatever you want to slap a title on a bit, but you're calling the shots and you have to think that deserves a paycheck because if you weren't doing it, you would have the business would have to pay somebody else to do that. The IRS, Uncle Sam would call this a reasonable salary, right? You have to give yourself a reasonable salary for the role. And that is delivered just like you would be paying an employee. That's typically set up through a payroll company. Maybe it's paid twice a month. And ideally, find that amount. Usually it's around, in most markets, I would say somewhere between 30 and 60 grand a year, where you're that quote reasonable salary. Work with your accountant on getting that number as low as possible. It needs to be reasonable, but there's a benefit of having that number as low as possible because that's where you're really paying all of your taxes is through that paycheck. Just like if you were which you are technically a W-2 employee for that, that's where you're paying all your taxes. So that's just a paycheck that happens just like if you were an employee at any other business. And then ideally, on top of that, you are taking draws. And we commonly refer to them as owner's draws. Some people do them monthly, quarterly. I like monthly just because it's not too often that you're stressing yourself out. But most of our bills on the personal side work off of monthly frequencies, like your mortgage is coming out once a month, your utilities are billed once a month. So I like the idea of a draw once a month rather than quarterly because I think quarterly allows you to go too long and inevitably the business ends up eating that money, finding somewhere else to spend it. So that draw happens ideally once a month on the same day every month. And if in a perfect world, it would be automated where it's just swept out. Potentially in early stages where you are still trying to figure out what that amount needs to be every month, you can manually do it. But even if it's 500 bucks, $1,000, I still think the habit of doing that owner's draw every month is really important because you can then, what I did personally is I would just gamify it. So if last month I took 1,000, the next month I tried to take 1,200, the next month I tried to take 1,500, and you just continue to try to gamify it for yourself and increase that owner's draw. And the nice thing about the owner's draw is if you're structured the way I talked about, you're not paying self-employment tax on that draw. So it's certainly an advantage. One of the advantages of being many disadvantages of being self-employed, but one of the advantages of being self-employed is if you set yourself up that way, you're not paying self-employment tax on those draws.
Nice. So we talked about kind of when and how. Are there any other important takeaways, just things for people to think about when it comes to paying yourself as an owner?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things to wrap up. I would say, as a whole, we have to know our numbers. We have to know spending wise, what are we spending every month for the business down to the dollar? Because if we're making 10 grand, 15 grand, 20 grand a month, every $100 thing we have on the spending plan that's coming out of our account makes a difference. And so doing a spending analysis or a spending audit where you're listing out everything that comes out and knowing what that number needs to be. And again, I'm a big fan for not liking numbers and kind of maybe being intimidated by them. The more you can gamify it, the better. So if you can gamify where, hey, I have whatever, 15 grand a month in expenses, I know that by listing it out. And then I can play a game with myself of, now I know going into the next month, I need to try to make 20 grand a month. Or you're making a game in the sense of it's goal setting, but it's also trying to be competitive with yourself. And that helps you hopefully stay accountable to marketing and all the things that are driving the top line income. But you at least know your spending plan from a how much I need to make to break even. So that's on the for the early stage owners. Certainly, hopefully it's a habit by the time you get to your more mature gym owners. But I think in the beginning, really important to know the numbers so that you exactly know how much break even is, and then play that game with yourself of how much can I draw out. For my folks that are, I would maybe say a more mature business, they're doing 30, 40, 50, 60 plus grand a month. The two biggest things I see at that stage is keeping a good pulse, of course, on overall numbers, but specifically your payroll. Because at that stage, typically once you're over 25 or 30 grand, you have a team and you have payroll and you continue to grow and you're continuing to add payroll. And I know I ran into it. I had a couple of years where I actually made less because I was probably too aggressive on the hiring front and made the payroll too large. And so thus it's a pie and the slice of the pie that I was taking decreased. And so just keeping an eye on your payroll, making sure it's under, I like the 40% mark where payroll is under 40%. That way you're protecting your profit margin. And then, of course, the last thing I would say is make sure you have a plan for the money that you are taking out so that it's, of course, you have options of certainly taking care of your personal financial situation. You have emergency funds that you could support. And then, of course, if there's anything left over that, hopefully we're building long-term wealth, long-term investments, et cetera. So yeah, those would be the final nuggets on paying yourself.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I think that sometimes we get so far into the weeds being a business owner, we get caught up in leads and clients and gross revenue. We think about the business that we want to have, and sometimes we lose sight of the fact that, hey, we started this business as a vehicle to live the life we want to live, have the impact we want to have. And so paying yourself is a pretty key part of that. So thanks for unpacking that today, Doug. And that's another episode of the Wealthy Gym Owners signing off.